A mason jar of water and dish soap can tell you if a piece of land is worthless. The USDA has graded every acre in this country on a scale of 1 to 8 since 1961. Agriculture Handbook, 210, 15 cents a copy. They printed the results county by county and gave them away free. Millions of acres changed hands at good dirt prices while sitting on Class 6 ground. The people who lost everything could have known for the price of a jar. So why didn't anybody open the book? Start with the jar, because the jar is the part you can do tonight. You take a quart jar, fill it a third of the way with soil from about 6 inches down, sift it. No rocks, no roots. Add water almost to the top and a spoonful of dish soap. Then you shake it like you mean it. 3 full minutes until the whole thing looks like muddy soup. Set it somewhere level and start your watch. 1 minute. That's all it takes for the sand to quit. Sand is heavy, so it drops out of the water first and stacks up in a clean band at the bottom that you can mark with a Sharpie right through the glass. About 2 hours later, the silt comes down and lands on top of it. Then the clay, the finest material in there, hangs suspended in the water for a day or two before it finally settles into the top band. 3 layers, 3 numbers. Measure them, work out the percentages, and you are holding your soil texture in your hand. 10 minutes of your hands. 48 hours of gravity doing the rest for free. And here's the part nobody tells you. You don't have to wait for the full picture to learn something. That first minute is already talking. If the sand band shoots up fast and the water goes clear, you are looking at ground that will drain out from under you every August. If the water stays milky and stubborn and refuses to clear at all, you are standing on clay that holds water like a bathtub, heaves under a foundation in winter, and strangles a septic field dead. Stay with me, because the jar is the easy part. The jar is measuring something. And what it measures is the exact thing that made a lot of people rich in this country and quietly destroyed everybody else. Now add the second test, which costs nothing at all. Dig a hole about a foot deep, somewhere near where you'd want a house or a shed or a leach field. Fill it with water and let it drain all the way out. Then fill it again and time how fast the water level drops. That's a perk test. Percolation. That is not folk wisdom, and it is not a garden trick. That is the same basic test a county sanitarian runs before they will issue you a septic permit. And it is the reason building permits get denied on land people already paid for. Think about that for a second. There is a test that decides whether a piece of ground can legally hold a house, and it involves a shovel, a hose, and a watch. Sand, silt, clay, and how fast water moves through them. That single reading answers almost everything you actually care about. Whether a foundation stays put, whether a septic system works or backs up into your basement, whether a well makes sense, whether an orchard survives its 3rd year, whether pasture carries animals in a dry summer or turns to concrete, whether your garden feeds you or just breaks your back. 1 jar, 1 hole, a 1/4 acre, a back lot, a listing you have been staring at online for 3 weeks. And this is not just for people buying. If you already own the place, this tells you where to put the shed so it doesn't sink, which corner of the yard is worth fencing for animals, why that one bed floods every spring while the rest of the garden goes dry, and whether the money you were about to spend on raised beds should go into drainage instead. People will spend $400 on soil amendments without ever finding out what they are amending. The jar cost you nothing. You already own the jar. But none of this is new, and that is where the story turns. Because there is a room in almost every county in America where somebody already did this work for you. Decades ago, on foot. Picture the shelf, county extension office, or the local NRCS field office, back wall, usually near a window nobody cleans. A row of hardbound books, mostly green or brown, county names printed on the spines, soil, survey of whatever county. Open one and you get a stack of aerial photographs, black and white, taken from a plane in some year before you were born, with hand-drawn boundaries laid over the top and little letter codes inside each shape. Every shape is a different soil. Every code has a page. Turn to that page and it tells you the depth to bedrock, how it drains, what it will grow, what it will not hold, and what happens when you try to build on it. Now find one of the older copies, not the library copy, the one that lived in a field office. Somebody has been in that book. There are fingerprints in the margin, coffee rings on the plates, and every so often, you will find a quarter section circled in pencil, hard enough to dent the paper. Somebody circled a piece of ground and closed the book. Hold that image, because we come back to it, and when we do, it is going to mean something completely different than it means right now. Who made these books? That is where the scale of this starts to land. The soil survey in this country goes back to 1899, not 1970, not the New Deal. 1899. For more than a century, federal soil scientists walked county after county with hand augers and shovels, digging pits, reading profiles, arguing about boundaries, and mapping the actual dirt of the United States one farm at a time. Then they printed it and gave it away. Nobody was selling anything. That is the part that is hard to get your head around now. This was 100 years of public labor, in boots, and the entire output was handed to any citizen who walked through the door and asked. Then, in September of 1961, two men named A.A. Klingebiel and Paul Montgomery published a thin government pamphlet that turned all of it into one number. Agriculture Handbook, 210, Land Capability Classification, 21 pages, 15 cents from the government printing office. What Handbook 210 did was simple and honestly, kind of brutal. It took every soil in America and sorted it into 8 classes, based on one question. What are the limitations of this ground, and what will it cost you to fight them? Class 1 is the good stuff. Deep, level, well-drained, almost no limitations. You can farm it hard for a century. The numbers climb from there, and every step up the scale is a step down in what the land will tolerate. Steeper, thinner, wetter, rockier, saltier. By the time you reach class 6 and 7, you are looking at ground that has no business under a plow at all, land that belongs in pasture or trees, or left alone. And then there is class 8. Class 8 is the government telling you, in writing, that this ground will not produce a worthwhile crop. Period. Not with better seed, not with more fertilizer, not with a harder work ethic. Its listed uses are wildlife, recreation, water supply, and scenery. That is the whole list. So sit with what that means. Since 1961, there has existed a free, printed, federally published document that will tell you, for your exact parcel, whether the ground you are standing on is a working asset or a very expensive view, which raises the question that this entire story runs on. If that book existed in every county, for free, in plain English, then how did this country manage to spend the 1970s buying millions of acres of marginal ground at premium prices on borrowed money and then lose it all? Because that happened. That is not a theory. 2 numbers before we go any further, and I am not going to explain either one yet. 1973 and 60%. Hold on to both. In about 10 minutes, they are going to connect in a way that is genuinely hard to sit through. Here's what I want you to understand before we get there, because it changes how the rest of this lands. Nobody burned these books. There was no order to hide them, no shredder, no locked room. I looked, and I am not going to invent one for you, because the truth is worse and a lot more useful. The maps were never buried. They were something quieter than buried. They were free. They were public. They were sitting on a shelf in your county, and by 1973, there was not a single person with money in a land deal who had any reason at all to walk over and open one. It starts in July of 1972. With the grain deal, almost nobody in the country knew was happening. The Soviet harvest had failed. Instead of announcing it, Soviet buyers came into the American market quietly and went to work through private grain exporters, one firm at a time, none of them aware of the full picture. Over July and August, they contracted for roughly 440 million bushels of American wheat, about $700 million worth. And the United States government had just made $750 million in credit available to help them do it, while continuing to pay export subsidies on the sales. They bought before the price moved, which meant the American taxpayer helped subsidize the purchase of his own grain reserve at a discount by the Soviet Union. The press ended up calling it the Great Grain Robbery. Watch what the price does next, because this is where the land story actually begins. Wheat was around $1.80 a bushel in July of 1972. By May of 1973, it was $3. By early September of 1973, it hit $4.77 on the Chicago market. Grain roughly tripled in about a year. And when grain triples, land does something very specific. Land stops being dirt and starts being a machine that prints money, and everybody wants a machine that prints money. Now bring in the man at the top of the USDA. Earl Butz, sworn in December of 1971, out in October of 1976. An agricultural economist from Purdue and probably the most consequential Secretary of Agriculture of the 20th century. Butz took the New Deal machinery apart. For 40 years, the federal government had paid farmers to hold ground out of production to keep prices from collapsing. Butz thought that was insane in a world that suddenly wanted to buy everything America could grow. So he tore up the set-aside programs and told farmers to plant every acre they had. Fence row to fence row. And if that meant the small operations couldn't keep up, he had an answer for that too. Get big or get out. Say it out loud, because that is the sound of a man telling an entire country that caution is a character flaw. So farmers got big. They bought the neighbor's place, then the place across the road. And here's the mechanical detail that decides everything that follows. They bought it with borrowed money, and the collateral for the loan was the land itself. That works beautifully while land goes up. It is a trapdoor when it stops, which brings us to the actual failure, and it is not the one people expect. The failure was that nobody in that transaction was being paid to look at the dirt. Think about who is in the room when a piece of ground changes hands. The seller prices it on comparables. What the neighbors got, the buyer's lender lends on comparables. The appraiser appraises on comparables. The land agent takes a percentage of comparables. 4 people, 1 method. And that method is nothing more than a record of what other people recently agreed to pay. Comparables do not know Class 2 from Class 6. Comparables cannot see depth to bedrock. Comparables have never once looked at drainage. A comparable is just an echo of the last transaction, and in a boom, the echo gets louder every single time it bounces. There was a book that could have broken that loop. It was free. It was in the county. It was written in plain English by men who had walked the ground. Nobody in the deal had a reason to open it. Not hidden, just unprofitable to mention. And once you see that, you start noticing it everywhere, because that is the actual shape of how useful knowledge disappears in this country. It rarely gets destroyed. It just stops paying anybody to repeat it. And 1 generation later, it may as well not exist. Now here's the detail that stopped me cold. And it is the reason I wanted to tell you this story at all. Handbook 2 and 10. That 21-page pamphlet from 1961 that classified every acre in America was approved for reprinting in January of 1973. January 1973. That is your first number. And there it is. In the exact window when wheat was climbing toward $5 and land was starting to run, the federal government reprinted the manual for telling good ground from bad and put it back into circulation. The warning was not withheld. It was reissued. It went out into a country that was too busy to read it. Now go back to that pencil circle In the margin of the county soil survey, somebody found the book. Somebody put a finger on a quarter section, followed the codes to the page, and read what the ground actually was. And then they made a decision. I have thought about that circle a lot. Either they saw Class 6 and walked away and kept their farm, and their kids still have it. Or they saw Class 6, and the neighbor was bidding, and the banker said yes, and the price was going up every month, and they bought it anyway. Because that is the thing about a boom. The information is not the hard part. Believing it when everybody around you is getting rich is the hard part. Then the second number arrives. Land peaked in 1981. In Iowa, the average acre was worth $2,147. Then interest rates went vertical. The export markets closed. Grain prices fell. And the collateral that every one of those loans was built on started to evaporate. By 1986, that same average Iowa acre was worth $787. 60%. That is your second number. And now it has a body count attached to it. Because when the land is worth less than the note against it, the bank forecloses. And the farm that had been in the family for 4 generations goes to auction on a Tuesday morning in front of the neighbors. A quarter of Iowa's farms disappeared over that decade. Now, I want to be careful here, because I am not going to tell you that a jar test would have prevented the farm crisis. It wouldn't have. Interest rates and grain exports drove that collapse, and they would have driven it regardless of soil class. But here is what soil class did decide. 2 farmers, both leveraged, both hurting in 1983. The one on Class 2 ground has land that still produces enough to service the note. The one on Class 6 ground, who paid Class 2 money for it because the comps said so, has nothing. His land was never going to carry that debt in any year at any interest rate. He bought a number that the dirt underneath him could not support. That was knowable in 1973, for free, on a shelf, in his county. Which brings us to right now, and to the part that actually belongs to you. That book is not on a shelf anymore. In August of 2005, the USDA put the entire National Soil Survey online and made it the official source, then phased out printing the county volumes altogether. It is called Web Soil Survey. It is free, it takes no account, and you can run it on your phone, standing in a field. You draw a boundary around the parcel you care about. It gives you back the soils inside that boundary, the percentage of each one, the drainage class, the depth to restrictive layers, and the land capability class. 1 through 8. The same scale Klingebiel and Montgomery wrote down in 1961, still running, still public. 125 years of men in boots with hand augers in your pocket for nothing. So here's the whole thing, and it takes an evening. Look up the parcel on Web Soil Survey first and write down the capability class before you go outside. So you know what you're supposed to find? Then go dig. Run the jar. Sand at 1 minute, silt at 2 hours, clay at 48. Dig your hole and run the perk test while the jar settles. Then compare all 3. If they agree, you know exactly what you own. If they disagree, that is not a problem. That is the most valuable thing you will learn all year, because the survey maps at a scale that can miss a wet corner or a gravel lens, and your jar just found something the map did not. Either way, you now know more about that ground than the person trying to sell it to you. And I think that is the real thing here. Not the jar. The jar is just a jar. It is that the answer was public the entire time. Printed, reprinted in the exact year it mattered most, given away for 15 cents. And it still didn't reach the people who needed it, because a boom is a machine for making people stop asking questions. You are the type who opens the book. Most people won't. They will look at the listing photos and the price per acre and what the neighbor got last spring, and they will call that research. That is exactly why this still works. So run it. Go pull a sample from your own ground tonight, 6 inches down, and get the jar shaking. Look up your parcel's capability class before you post, and then tell me in the comments what class your land came back as. and whether it matched what you were told when you bought it. I want to know how many of you find out you are sitting on better ground than you thought. And I want to know how many find out the opposite. Because there is one more thing from this same era that I have been pulling on, and it is bigger than soil. Everything I just showed you is about what your ground is. The next one is about what is underneath it. And who decided the rain landing on your roof was never actually yours.